Jean-Roch Coignet's Memoirs offer a vivid account of his life as a soldier under Napoleon Bonaparte. The French army just suffered a disaster at Leipzig. After the Emperor gathered all our remnants, the army crossed the Saale on October 20th. The Emperor spent the night in a small pavilion on a hill planted with vines. On the 23rd, in Erfurt, King Murat left Napoleon to return to Naples. During that first day's march, the remaining Saxons and Bavarians deserted at night. Only the Poles remained loyal to us. The army left Erfurt on October 25th and successively moved to Gotha and Fulda. Informed of a maneuver by the Bavarian general Raed, the Emperor headed quickly to Hanau. Arriving before the forest that the road traverses near this town, Napoleon spent the night making his arrangements. The next morning, arms crossed, he passed before the guard, saying, "I am counting on you to make way for me to reach Frankfurt. Be ready, we must pass over them. Do not worry about prisoners. Move forward, make them regret blocking our path. 2 battalions, 1 of chasseurs and 1 of grenadiers, and 2 squadrons of chasseurs and 2 of grenadiers are enough. You will be commanded by Friant." He walked around, talking to everyone, but the stragglers were not well received. All this took place in a large pine forest that hid us from the enemy's view. But we faced a stronger force than us. The Bavarian army opposing us at this point had more than 40,000 men. The Emperor gave the signal. The chasseurs went first, followed by the grenadiers. The enemy formed an imposing mass. Seeing my old comrades depart, I shuddered. The mounted grenadiers, along with all the cavalry, advanced. I approached the Emperor. "If His Majesty allowed me to follow the mounted grenadiers—" "Go," he said. "One more brave man." How pleased I was with my audacity. I had never asked him for anything. I feared him too much. Our old foot grenadiers approached the mass, waiting for them steadfastly on the other side of a stream that crossed the main road and received waters from considerable marshes. We were momentarily caught between 2 fires. If the enemy had taken advantage, we would have had to lay down our arms. It was impossible to maneuver. We sank into the mud up to our knees. But we managed to flank the position. The chasseurs charged at the terrified Bavarians, who could not resist and were cut to pieces. We struck like lightning when the cavalry opened its ranks, and it was the most terrible carnage I have ever seen. I was at the extreme left of the mounted grenadiers and wanted to follow the captain. "No," he said. "You and your horse are not strong enough. You would hinder the maneuver." I was annoyed but contained myself. Glancing to my left, I saw a path along the city wall. Hanau is surrounded on the side where I was by a very high wall that masks the houses. I galloped along it. A platoon of Bavarians was approaching from my direction, led by a handsome officer. Seeing me alone, he charged at me. I stopped. He approached and lunged at me with his long sword. I parried his thrust with the back of my large sabre, which I still have at home. I then approached him and cut off half his head. He fell like a stone. I grabbed his horse by the bridle and galloped off, while his platoon fired at me. I arrived like the wind near my Emperor, with a beautiful white Arabian horse with a plume-like tail. Seeing me near him, the Emperor asked, "You are back? Whose horse is this?" "Mine, sire." I still had my sabre hanging. I cut the face of a handsome officer. It was time, for he was brave. He charged me. "You are now mounted on a fine horse. Prepare all my carriages. You will leave tonight for Frankfurt as soon as the road is clear." "We cannot pass. They are all piled on top of each other. I will clear the road immediately." Aides-de-camp arrived, telling His Majesty, "The victory is complete." He took large pinches of snuff. He had another day of happiness. He sent all the stragglers to clear the main road to make way for his park. I was ordered to leave under good escort. It was a night so dark we could not see, and we arrived in Frankfurt during the night of November 1st to 2nd. In a large square there were piles of beautiful wood that gave us good fires. The Emperor spent the night on the battlefield, which General Raed hastily abandoned, retreating under the protection of the town, which he ordered to be completely evacuated during the night. At dawn, the army marched towards the city of Frankfurt. The Bavarian army lost 10,000 men, 6,000 of whom were killed or wounded. The French loss was 5,000 men, including 3,000 sick or wounded. The emperor arrived on the 2nd and went to Mainz the same day. He stayed there for 6 days to issue his final orders. On November 9th, he arrived in Paris and went immediately to Saint-Cloud. The army entered Mainz on November 3rd with the unfortunate remnants of the once flourishing Great Army now deprived of all necessities. They were housed in convents and churches. They were struck by yellow fever and were found dead, all mixed together. In their frightful delirium, they called out the names of their relatives and livestock, and I had the painful task of removing all the dead bodies of those who died during the night. Convicts had to be used to load them into large carts and stack them like hay. They initially refused, but were threatened with being shot. The dead were toppled over by tilting the cart. Like in Moscow, this painful task fell to me. All the emperor's carriages had left. May such horrors never happen again. The small headquarters moved to Metz, where we stayed for a long time. All the troops took their quarters, and we remained inactive for more than 2 months. The emperor withdrew a large part of the troops and many officers from Spain, 1,200 gendarmes on foot, and whatever he could to form a new army. In Paris, he combined them with the honour guards, but they were too young to face 3 great powers, the entire Confederation of the Rhine. There were as many enemy soldiers against one Frenchman as there were sovereigns against Napoleon, and yet, wherever they faced the emperor, they were defeated. If the energy of his generals had not waned, the enemies would have found their graves on French soil, but fortune and honours had softened them. The burden fell on the great man. He was everywhere. He saw everything. The enemy columns ascended the Rhine to reach Champagne and Lorraine. On January 27, 1814, the Battle of Saint-Dizier took place. It was not a battle, but a fierce combat. The town was ravaged by gunfire, and one could count thousands of bullets in the door and shutter closures. The trees in a small square were riddled, all the houses were plundered, and no inhabitant could stay in the town. The Allies lost many men and were forced to retreat to take a position on the heights of Brienne. They occupied a position from which they could bombard us. All our troops' efforts were repeatedly repelled by their artillery. As we manoeuvred, the ground became sodden. The day advanced, and we could not break free in the waterlogged ground. However, the emperor, on horseback near an enclosure, prepared to make one last attempt. Prince Berthier saw Cossacks on our right taking away a cannon. "To me," he said, "at the gallop." He charged like lightning. The 4 Cossacks fled, and the unfortunate soldiers brought back their cannon. At that moment, the emperor said to him, "I want to sleep at Brienne Castle. This must end. Take command of my staff and follow my movement." He passed before his first line, stopping in the centre of the regiment, saying, "Soldiers, I am your colonel. I march at your head. I take command. Brienne must be taken." All the soldiers shouted, "Long live the emperor!" Night was falling. There was no time to lose to command the movement. Every soldier was worth 4. The fury of our troops was such that the emperor could not contain them. They rushed ahead of the staff. The great momentum was given. It was victory or death. At the foot of the mountain facing the castle and the main street of Brienne, the slope was steep. Enormous efforts were needed to reach the goal. All obstacles were overcome. On the night of January 29th, Brienne was captured. It was so dark that the combatants were indistinguishable. They were upon each other, bayonets forward. The Russians massed in the main street were driven out. Our left-wing troops climbed so rapidly on their side that they struck General Blucher's staff. He lost many officers. Among the prisoners was a nephew of Mr. Hardenberg, Chancellor of Prussia, who recounted that, surrounded several times by our skirmishers, the Field Marshal owed his salvation only to the most energetic defence and the vigour of his horse. The Emperor then made a left turn, did not stop at the castle, and pursued the enemy to Mézières. In the dark night, a band of Cossacks prowling for loot heard the horses of Napoleon and his escort. This made them rush. They first attacked a general who shouted, "To the Cossacks!" and defended himself. One of the Cossacks, seeing a rider in a grey overcoat a few steps away, charged him. General Corbineau first tried to intervene but failed. Colonel Gourgaud, who was talking to Napoleon at that moment, defended himself and shot the Cossack point blank. At the gunshot, we arrived at these marauders. It was time to stop. Everyone was exhausted and starving. 24 hours without dismounting, without eating. I can say that the soldiers had done more than their strength allowed and fought like lions, 1 against 4. From Brienne, the Emperor headed for Troyes, crossing the left bank of the Aube, and we stayed for 3 days to rest. On February 1st, we encountered the enemy at Champaubert. They received a good beating. We had to fall back to the right bank of the Aube, to the village of La Rotière. The day of La Rotière was the first pitched battle of the campaign. We held our battlefield, but nothing more. We could not continue the next day. However, the coalition could not boast of defeating us. On February 11th, we fought at Montmirail. Everywhere the Emperor was, the enemy was beaten. On the 12th, the Battle of Château-Thierry. On the 15th, the Battle of Gennevilliers. On the 17th, we arrived at Nangis after forced night marches on side roads to reach the enemy's columns. We pushed considerable columns towards Montereau. It was there that the Emperor had placed an army corps to receive them. Not at all. He was betrayed by the one who let them pass, and all the weight fell on us. This battle took place on the 18th. Montereau was devastated. Shells fell on the town from all sides. The Emperor, furious at not hearing the cannon of his army corps, said, "At the gallop!" We were on the Nangis road, to the left of the Paris road. Arriving on a hill to the left of this road, he spotted the enemy from this position, marching across the Montereau bridge. Furious at this setback, he said to Marshal Lefebvre, "Take all my staff. I will keep Montion, this one and that one with me. Go at the gallop, seize the bridge. The battle is lost. I will come to your aid with my old guard." And off we went. Descending the mountain with this intrepid marshal, we arrived without being stopped. We turned left by 4s on the bridge, flat out. Not all of their rear guard had crossed. Reaching the middle of the bridge, a wide breach was no obstacle for us, due to the speed at which we were driven. Our horses flew. I was mounted on my beautiful Arabian horse, taken at the Battle of Hanau. Here is an incident worth reporting. Crossing the destroyed arch of the bridge, the parapets remaining intact, I saw a man lying flat along the parapet, sliding pieces of wood to aid the passage. At the end of the bridge, which is long, there is a street to the left. This suburb being crowded with the rear guard's wagons, we could only pass by cutting our way through. We cleared everything. Those who escaped our fury hid under the wagons. Foam came from the marshal's mouth as he struck. Reaching a beautiful road leading to Saint-Dizier, before an immense plain, the marshal continued our charge. But the Emperor, seeing us engaged in certain peril, had a battalion of foot chasseurs lay down their packs to come to our rescue. This battalion saved us. We were repelled by a mass of cavalry. The chasseurs lay flat along the road, and after we passed them, the enemy cavalry was surprised by a volley. The ground was littered with horses and men, and we reached the suburb. During the charge, the Emperor, with his old guard and artillery, climbed the hill facing Montereau. Opposite the bridge, on a rotunda wall adorned with beautiful arbours, our guns in battery thundered at the masses in the plain. The Emperor acted as a gunner. He aimed the pieces himself. They wanted to withdraw him. "No," he said, "the cannonball that is to kill me has not yet been cast." Had he found a glorious death there after being betrayed by the man he had elevated to high rank? He was furious at such a setback. On our side we crossed the bridges again and climbed back near the Emperor. "Your speed in this charge," he said, "gives me 2,000 prisoners. I thought you all captured. Your chasseurs saved us. said the marshal. I was so pleased with myself that, dismounting, I kissed my horse. Thanks to him, I had cut down at my ease. On the 21st, the Battle of Méry-sur-Seine. On the 28th, the Battle of Cézanne. On March 5th, the Battle of Berry-au-Bac, where the Poles defeated the Cossacks. On the 7th, the Battle of Craonne. This one was terrible. Considerable heights were taken by the foot chasseurs of the Old Guard and by some 200 foot gendarmes arriving from Spain, who performed prodigious feats of valour. On March 13th, we arrived at the gates of Reims at night. A Russian army occupied the town, entrenched with redoubts made of manure and well-filled barrels. The town gates were barricaded. Near the gate facing the Paris road, there is an elevation topped by a windmill. The Emperor set up his headquarters there in the open air. We made a good fire for him. One could not see 2 steps ahead, and he was so tired from the day at Craonne that he asked for his bearskin and lay down near the good fire. We all silently watched him. The Russians made an advance at 10 o'clock in the evening. They launched a sortie with a terrible fusillade on our left. The Emperor stood up, furious. "What's happening there? It's a hurrah, sire!" His aide-de-camp replied. "Where is so-and-so?" It was a captain commanding a battery of 16 guns. "There he is, sire," they said. He approached the Emperor. "Where are your guns?" "On the road." "Go bring them here. I cannot pass," he said. "The line artillery is ahead of me. Throw all those guns into the ditches. I must be in Reims by midnight. You are a fool if you don't break through the gates of Reims. Go," he told us. "Throw everything into the ditches." We all set off. Arriving near the guns and caissons, instead of overturning them, we moved them aside with all the gunners and train soldiers. It was done in a minute, and the 16 guns passed under the Emperor's watchful eyes, who saw them pass with his back to his fire. They set up in battery to the right of the road in a beautiful square facing the gate. One could not see a step ahead, and unfortunately there were 2 guns in battery near the gates. In case of a Russian sortie, they could not be seen at all. Our guns in battery fired volleys at the gates and redoubts. The shells fell in the middle of the town. During the cannonade, the Emperor ordered the cuirassiers to be ready to enter the town, indicating the streets each squadron should take. Then he gave the signal. The cuirassiers charged and formed up behind the guns. The firing ceased, and everyone rushed into the town. This charge was so terrible that they passed through everything, and the people inside, hearing such a din, lit the windows. There were lights everywhere. One could have found a needle. The Emperor, at the head of his staff, was in Reims by midnight, and the Russians in full retreat. Our cuirassiers cut down at will. Their hurrah cost them dearly. If the Emperor had been supported in France as he was in Champagne, the Allies would have been lost. But what could we do? 10 against 1. We had bravery, not strength. We had to succumb. Fontainebleau was the end of our misfortunes. We wanted to make one last effort, march on Paris, but it was too late. The enemy was at the edge of the forest, and Paris had surrendered without resistance. We had to return to Fontainebleau. The Emperor was under the scythe of all the men he had raised to high dignities. They forced him to abdicate. I wished to follow him. Count Montyon went to find him and spoke of me. "I cannot take him. He is not part of my guard. If my signature could help him, I would name him battalion chief, but it is too late." He was granted 600 men for his guard. He called for arms and asked for volunteers. All stepped out of the ranks, and he was forced to make them return. "I will choose them. No one move." And passing before the line, he selected himself. "You, step out," and so on. It took a long time. Then he said, "Check if I have my count." "You need 20 more," said General Droot. "I will make them step out." Once his contingent was complete, he selected the non-commissioned officers, the officers, and he returned to his palace, telling General Drouot, "You will take my guard to Louis XVI in Paris after my departure." When all preparations were complete and his equipment ready, he gave the order for the last time to take up arms. All these old warriors gathered in the great courtyard, once so brilliant. He descended the steps, accompanied by all his staff, and stood before his old guardsman. "Bring me my eagle." And taking it in his arms, he gave it a farewell kiss. It was so touching. There was a murmur in all the ranks. I can say that I shed tears seeing my dear emperor leave for the island of Elba. There was only one cry: "We are left to the mercy of a new government." If Paris had held for 24 hours, France would have been saved. But at that time the Parisian populace did not know how to build barricades. They only learned it to use them against fellow citizens. We had to take the white cockade, but I kept mine as a souvenir. This concludes the 13th part of the story. Thank you very much for listening. Please consider subscribing for more episodes.